Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Frank Lloyd Wright said, "Art is a discovery and development of elementary principles of nature into beautiful forms suitable for human use." For Bryan Montalvo at Keanison Knives, melding materials together to make functional art is like seeing a master blend together paint at their easel. With each handmade knife, Bryan and his partner in knives, Will, spend considerable time evaluating materials and their aesthetic to produce some of the most eye-catching and superbly operating knives on their limited runs of custom folders. With a background in industrial design, Bryan obsesses over the form and function of knife design and the combination of materials used so that even in seeming chaos, each component looks like it was always supposed to exist that way. From tip to tail, a Keanison knife screams their design, and the tendrils of Bryan's art aesthetic are present in every element that Keanison Knives makes. Bryan, it's a pleasure to have you on the Good Old Blades podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Aaron.
So I've known about your work for a long time. I followed you on social media as long as that's been a thing, and I'm interested to know a little bit more about you personally, and then we'll get into Keanison Knives and the group that comprises that and kind of what you do. But can you introduce yourself in a way that my audience, who probably might not dig as deep into the backstory of how you guys got started, would be able to know? It's like kind of surface level, and then we'll get deeper from there.
Sure. I guess, start intro. My name's Bryan. I'm originally from California, live in Austin, Texas, and we make knives out here. I got into knives as a kid. My dad, like most of us, my dad got me into knives when I was young. I carried a pocket knife most of my life. Nothing fancy. I had some Gerbers back in the day, and nothing like any Spydercos or anything. But my dad got me into the love of knives. I always had one on me growing up. I mean, I remember taking them to school and not being a big deal, right? Like, we just had pocket knives. But I've always enjoyed knives. It's kind of something I've always dabbled in. I didn't know what a nice knife was till my wife got me on Instagram years ago. I'm not really a big social media guy. I don't really like Facebook, but I got into all the, Gucci Glocks and all the guns and stuff, and she was showing me guns on Instagram, and so I started perusing through that, and I found a Rad Cleaver. I had no idea who Rad Knives was. I did a little research and ended up reaching out to him on Instagram and saying, "Hey, how do I get one of these?" And he said, "Yeah, it'll be $2,500, which was early. I mean, that was years ago, right? You can't get a Rad Cleaver for $2,500 to save your life back then." Anyway, he said $2,500 in 6 months. I said, "Okay." And he said, "And I need the money up front." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I see what we're doing here." So, I did a little bit more research and got into the community a little bit and started messaging people and figuring out what it was all about. I found the Koning Arius. That was one of my favorite first designs that I ever saw. It was Gen 1 too. It was the first time that they were spinning it up. I still have mine. It's Cerakoted gray and Cerakoted black blade, and one of those that will never leave my collection. But yeah, found the Arius, and then DSK knives, and started collecting a little bit. And I went to a buddy and I said, these knives are awesome. My background's in industrial design. I was an industrial designer previously, and I said, "I think I can design one of these if you can help me machine it." And so we kind of jumped down that path and see what we could do with folding knives. It was super frustrating. If you ever tried to make a folding knife, we went right to folding knives. We didn't even do fixed blades. So it's a work of love. It's not easy, and it's frustrating, and so yeah, that sparked my interest. And here we are. I think 7 years later, maybe 8 now in COVID years. I don't know. But years later, still doing it and loving it, and it's still challenging, and one of those things that either helps me sleep at night because I did it right, or it keeps me up at night because I did it wrong. But I think that's one of the things I love most about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say knives are some of the most euphoric and the most depression inducing experiences I've had. Um,
Sure.
have you
Yeah.
always been in the vein of folders and I don't know, you wouldn't call that mid tech, right? I mean, what is like the focus of knives that you're in as a collector and developing them?
Yeah, I struggle with that mid-tech term. I don't really I guess that's kind of what the terms escape me. We started as a handmade custom knife company. We primarily only did, no CNC in here. We use manual mills and manual lathes to turn everything down. And we still do that. We just got into the Mac, right? They call it machine assisted custom knife. Um, the Mac category, which I guess has taken over like mid tech. I don't know. That's a loose term for me. But yeah, so we primarily are handmade, and then we work with HMC Knives, Jim Vandevelt in Pennsylvania. He does kind of a mid tech for us. I guess that would be. It's still a handmade for all intents and purposes. It's a Mac knife, machine assisted. He does all the machining. We do the grinds. We do all the finish work. Um, Kind of a nice collaboration. But yeah, I don't know about the mid tech thing, but we're just we try to make cool custom folders. Everything, I guess, everything one off, so to speak. I mean, it's the same model with different materials, different everything's done by hand, so no two are the same. So it's I don't know where do you put that? It's a loose category.
Yeah. Well, in web design and in like productizations type of stuff, we call that bespoke, right?
There you go.
And
There you go.
it's
Yeah. Well,
interesting to me in some ways that like it doesn't matter what area of the knife industry you're in, there's always somebody trying to categorize or like make things kitschy, right?
yeah. Don't put me in
Yeah.
a box, bro.
Well,
No.
and I mean that's interesting. I was talking to Grace Horn. It was, everybody's journey is different, and you work hard at this thing, and what it is that you create is really like specific to you. So, whether
Sure.
you say like mid tech or high tech or Mac or whatever, I, it interests me in a nomenclature mostly just to be able to navigate through like the research and finding different things, but it really has very little impact to me on what that creative process is, right? um, but
Yeah.
man,
Yep.
there are some knives that I've seen you post on social that just like pop in every single way except the one where my wallet can afford it. um,
Yeah.
and
I know.
that's,
I
I
know.
think that's probably one of the most interesting paradigms that I have in knife making and knife collecting is that if I could take all of the money that I have, not just what I make on knives, and turn that into supporting other makers and collecting their work and whatnot, I probably would. But
Yeah.
there's I don't know that I really care about the kids having a college fund or anything, but I would like to not be so far in debt that if something happens to me, we got to sell everything off and then they get nothing. So
Well, and that's, I mean, it's a very valid point, and especially these days, saving that money. We do this year. We'll have done 5 knife shows this year. We did 6 last year. And people always ask me if I shop. I'm a knife fan too. So what do I buy at the shows? And honestly, these days I try not to buy things at shows because if I bought a knife at every knife show I went to, I'd walk back, I'd come back broke. It's just there's so much cool stuff. But at the same token, there's always something that you see repeatedly, and it's like, oh, I really do want that. So I buy things here and there, and I still collect. But yeah, you want to support your buddies and support the industry and all that stuff. But yeah, I hear you. I consciously try not to purchase at shows these days, just that exact purpose. And goes back to my original story. The reason that I started making knives was because that $2,500 rad, which I should have bought because I could have made money on back in the day, uh, I couldn't afford, I couldn't even imagine spending $2,500 on a knife back then. It was just so foreign to me. But I had $60, $80. If I was going to spend $350 on a knife, it better be really good. So um, yeah, it's a little bit jaded these days with the way things work around here, but um, it's a lot of time. I understand where the money comes these days. I mean, obviously, and you don't see a lot of the fails. You don't. It's I love that thing. Picasso saying, "I'm gonna mess it up," but he sketches something on a napkin and he charges the woman for it. She says, "What? Why so much?" And it's like, well, you think it only took me 15 seconds, but it took me a lifetime to learn how to do that, right? That's kind of what you're paying for is the people that have spent the time to figure out how to get it done and hopefully efficiently, because that's the only way you can really make any money doing it is, keeping processes efficient and spending the time. But still, we work with so many materials that sometimes you don't predict how it's going to react in this certain circumstance when you use it as a bolster rather than using it as a scale. It's a it's a gamble here and there, but that's what keeps it fun. I enjoy coming into work every day and trying something new. I get as excited as everybody else to see what, when we sand into that Fordite, what does that final layer look like? I say that because I'm working on a Fordite knife today, but I'm as excited as everybody else is to see what it looks like after I sand it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you're not exactly working with cheap materials in any way, shape, or form. That's part of. I'm interested to know what got you into the vein of using, the titaniums and Timascuses and things like that. Was there a conscious decision based on your, your inner eye to follow that vein, or is it something that naturally progressed, or kind of what made you do that?
So being a fan of products and product design and things like that, I love materials, and that's my buddy Matt, Hawks Nest Customs out here. He's a big material guy. We get along really well because I love that aspect of this industry, and I think a lot of people do. I think that's why the worry coins or the worry stones and things like that catch on. Is you really just want a little bit of that material, whether it be Westinghouse or Damascus or whatever it is. So in the same thing, I saw these knives out of black Damascus and white Damascus and zircotai and all that, and I wanted one and I wanted to play with it. One of my first customs was a Scorpion 6. Um, I forget the model off the top of my head. I still have it, but I bought it. It's an awesome knife. He did this cool polish job on it, but it had a Damascus clip, and that was the first Damascus I ever owned, and I was so excited about it. And so that was also one of the things that motivated me to make knives was I wanted, if I was going to pay $500 for the sheet of Damascus, I need to make something cool out of it and polish it and heat it and be able to play with it. And so it really started with wanting to play with Zirc and Damascus and all that stuff. And then as I got more exposed to all the other materials, then again, it's like, ooh, Fordite. I had heard about Fordite before it became popular in knives years ago, and I was wanting, Fordite jewelry and things like that. I wanted to play with it. So when it popped into the industry, I said, well, yeah, I want to play with that, right? And it just snowballed from there. And then what I learned was some of the older material. I mean, all of the older micartas, like the Westinghouse and the Allied paper and all the older stuff. They're a lot easier to work than some of the newer stuff, right? And whatever they used in it, formaldehyde and things that we should not be breathing. I'm sure, that's why we are wearing masks. But um, all those old micartas are so much fun to work. They're so stable and so easy to sand and so easy to finish. It's just such a joy to play with that stuff. So then I got again more and more down the rabbit hole, and you kind of, now I'm a material hoarder. I just pull them out of the drawer, and we kind of, what do I have over here? I got a really nice piece of lined. Nobody can see this on the audio, but really nice piece of lined Allied paper that just is so gorgeous. It just sparks like, oh, what am I going to do with that? How do I use that? Because it's just something I want to own, right? I want to own that on a knife. I want to own it I want it in my pocket,
Yeah.
right? Um, so yeah, that's really the motivation, right? Is using the cool stuff so I can have it,
Yeah.
play with it.
Well, and I think something that I think about with materials is when I put it on a knife, I like the idea that somebody is owning a story behind it, right? Because I mean, you think about it, like, is World War II era like industrial denim really that great to work with, or are there some things that are a little bit more pricey or a pain in the butt to get to the dimensions that we want them to be? Probably not.
Sure.
But it's a cool story, and it's like, I don't know, it's as old as people like putting their own teeth or bones or ashes or things like that in knives. It's a very personal story. It's the same way with like anvils. Like I collect anvils from time to time,
That's cool.
and I like the idea of where that thing came from, who was beating on it, like whose livelihood did that thing represent. Um, and so all
Absolutely.
that's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
What do you how are you guys coping with the higher prices in like vintage Micartas and things like that now? Have you noticed an effect to you, or is it like I have mixed feelings about it because like back
Yeah.
I bought a shop from an old timer that I knew a buddy from work, and his dad was a knife maker for forever, and he had some Ivorite, and I was talking to him about, hey, I'll probably put this on a knife and whatever. He's like, don't even concern yourself with that junk. Like, put some like desert ironwood or some mammoth ivory or something like that on it. And then there was a time when I was unemployed that ended up selling that, and I was offering it for like not that much. A big block of it was
Yeah.
probably like, I think I was asking like 250 for it, and this guy was like, this guy was like, no, like I can't do that. Like I'll get, like, I think he gave me
Yeah.
like double or a little bit over what I was asking for it, and said, yeah, no, and I do appreciate that. But the thing is that even now, if I looked at the dimensions and everything of the material that I sold, it probably would have been like closer to $1,800, $2,000. Yeah, but I mean, but I needed the money at the time, and I thought it was fine, and I like the.
The market
Hmm.
changes too. I mean, the more we use it, the more the price goes up. So what you can't really go back and say, it's relative at
Yeah,
some point. But
there were some 3/16
yeah,
inch scales that the original price tag on it was $7.99,
wow,
$7.99, and yeah, I
wow,
included those, and can you
$7.
imagine? And so
Crazy.
I can understand
Yeah,
from some of the old timers that they're like, junk, right? It's like it's the same as buying an
yeah.
eighth inch or 3/16 inch thing of G10 today.
Well, you just can't get it anymore, right? I mean, it's not something that you're going to go down to the store and get more of. So as we use it, the price goes up. That's what it is. But everything's cyclical too. I mean, this is the hot thing now, but a lot of these slabs that you're finding, they were in guys' garages, right? I mean, nobody thought twice about it, and then here we are. So, um, it's cool. I mean, they're awesome materials. Either way, whether you put a price tag high on it or not, it's so rare that you don't want to screw it up, right? Because you can't necessarily go find more of it. So, I have the reverence for the material either way. And like you said, I think when down the road, when the ridiculous things that we use all the time, the prices go up. It's going to be funny to see. I wonder what that'll be though, because I can't think of anything off the top of my head that we make that somebody's gonna be like, oh yeah, I need some of that. Uh, Maybe some of the
Yeah.
micartas, I suppose, but old micarta is it's just so stable. It's you know you sand it, you grind on it. It's so nice to work. It's like I said, whatever's toxic that's gonna kill me in 10 years in there, that whatever it is, it's fantastic.
Well, yeah, yeah, no, and I agree. It stinks and it's really dusty, but
Yeah.
that old Russian barbed wire micarta, most of the weave was asbestos.
Sure. Yeah, I try to
It,
stay away from that stuff, man. I have a block of asbestos paper in there, and I'm like, no, I'm not ready to go yet.
well, I
Uh,
mean, mesothelioma or whatever
yeah,
is a thing, but
it's a
you
thing.
know, yeah, I mean, what I when I grind on vintage micartas and stuff, what I think more about isn't that my exposure rate's high because I use a respirator and stuff, but it's like all
Yeah.
those particles just sit around in your shop for forever.
Yep.
And this thing with the glasses or asbestos or whatever is that it's really hard to get rid of.
Sure. I mean, it's all over my clothes every day. I mean, I never escape it. So
Yeah.
it's it's inevitable, but it's part of the industry. Unfortunately, it does keep me up a lot. I do try to be safe, like you. I mean, I wear my respirator and I blow myself off with the air and all that stuff. But I mean, the beard and all that. It's something to think about for sure. But
Yeah. One thing I didn't know that I would like so much, but I actually really enjoy is working with carbon fiber.
Yeah. Also, I mean, speaking of bad things for you,
Yeah.
there's so many cool carbon fibers out there right now. I mean, so many guys are making such cool stuff, camo carbon and fat carbon and all those guys. I mean, um, carbon fiber is not what it once was when we were kids, just the black weave, you know, it's, it's so cool. I think it's a great material. I've always enjoyed it though. I'm not one of those. I have, again, my buddy Matt, he doesn't like carbon fiber, but, there's always something for somebody. We have some, speaking of Matt, SpaceX carbon fiber. So off one of the SpaceX rockets in here.
Oh, that's rad.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's a really big weave. We're working on it right now, one for him, but that's a cool thing to have.
Yeah. I'm interested in folding knives. I've gone down this path of slip joints and whatnot, but I do. Part of this like inheritance process of like me buying John's shop and everything was that Martin Pullen was a knife maker in Texas that did liner locks. And you know, like the old style, like if you look at Johnny Stout or whatever, it's kind of like in that same vein with the screws and everything.
Hmm.
And I have some patterns of his, and I've thought about getting into like the fine folder. I guess gentleman style. I don't know what you'd call that, but it's more old school
Yeah, classic.
liner
Yeah,
lock.
sure. Yep.
And and what I kind of like about what I'm seeing in the industry is that you have all these one-off fixed blades where people are using cutoffs to make a little different things. But then if I look at your aesthetic, it really lends itself real well to you being able to blend different materials inside of you have the space that's on the scales, and you're able to have different components of material and use quite small pieces to still give that feel. And is that part of your industrial design like concept of being able to tie these smaller pieces together, or is it a utility piece because you have this like little thing that you don't want to waste?
No, usually it's usually very deliberate. It kind of, I appreciate that it looks like that because I mean that's very much the style, right? Is kind of the utilize what you have thing. But I mean, like this little piece, right? This little piece that I have here, we certainly don't get rid of it, and at some point the build will dictate how we use that material. But for the most part, all of it's very deliberate. I guess it's kind of an industrial design thing. I was telling somebody else one time that kind of like getting dressed in the morning, right? A lot of us, I mean, I just wear black every day, but you match. Some people match their shoes to their pants and their hat, and this and that. I love grabbing some materials that we have around, and like you said, sometimes it does dictate. I only have this much of this, so here's how we're going to use it. But other times it's like, let's wouldn't it be cool if kind of thing. I have a knife here on the counter that didn't really work out. It's inlaid bakelite in, I believe, black micarta with inlaid pink and orange bakelite uh, uh, plugs, I guess, because they're round. And it was really cool. And a lot of that design was dictated by, well, we don't have a big sheet of this left. We just have smaller pieces of bakelite. So let's turn them down and try to make, little round plugs out of them. So yeah, sometimes the material dictates the build. Other times it's, you know, because we have so much of things, we're blessed to be able to have all those materials. It's like, what are we going to use this for? But less is more. A lot of that stuff when you're using, I say this, but I just did a full dress knife. But when you're using a lot of the Damascuses and stuff like that, less is more. A little bit goes a long way. Again, I just did a full dress one that's super bright yesterday, but there's a place for that too. I don't know. We like mixing it up. It's fun to change styles. It's a little bit of a box you put yourself in to try to keep pushing, but yeah, it's kind of what keeps me going every day is sitting here and saying, okay, what haven't we done, and what can we do with what we have? So yeah, it's fun. I enjoy that. That's one of the best things about making handmade custom knives.
Well, yeah, and what I would say, that box that we paint ourselves in is a really interesting paradigm, right? Because one way you get stuck, and the other way you use it as an artistic constraint. You say like, what would happen if we did this, 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 and this, and then we modeled a few different like things that we could do with it,
Sure.
and,
Yeah.
and you play with it. It's like spitballing versus getting yourself so narrowly focused on an aesthetic that that's really all you can do anymore. And you're like, well, that's what I'm known for.
Yeah. And somebody asked me, I mean, people ask me all the time, why don't you just do like a run of 10 knives, right? Like, I mean, what you could do more if you just did 10 at a time and went through and ground them all and did, your setup for the grind, you just grind. And I get it. I mean, sometimes I look back and I'm like, yeah, we probably should do that, but it just, again, it isn't, it would be a little bit dull. Like it wouldn't get me out of bed in the morning and saying, okay, let's run through contouring today. It just, I guess it's a little bit selfish and foolhardy, but I really like what we do, and the way we do it. So I don't know. Being stubborn, I guess it's that artistic side. I hate saying, art. It's knife making. It's a business. I'm not trying to be an artist, but I enjoy that side of it. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's so everybody desires, I think, self-expression, right? And so, what
Sure.
like some people call that art, and some people just call it being me, right? And I
Yeah.
think it maybe some of that comes from like psychologically where we sit on the self-esteem versus creativity side of things, right? Like I would say in some ways there's a lot of risk to my self-expression. Not everybody likes what I like, or not everybody is into it. I spend a lot of money on things, and it can be psychologically a little bit difficult to spend like
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds of dollars and countless man hours on something, and then it's just like a humongous flop. Um,
Yeah, that hurts. And you always take that risk, right? Anytime you do something new, it's like, are people going to enjoy this? And to the material side, again, we kind of painted ourselves into this material box, which is fun, but a lot of pressure. A lot of times it's the things that haven't been done or haven't been done for a reason, right? Because that material probably shouldn't be on a knife. That's not, and I criticize myself as much as other people do. Like, why would you put that on a knife? Come on, dude. This is a tool, not necessarily something pocket art kind of thing. So there's always criticism no matter what you do, but you hope that people enjoy it, right? You hope that enough people enjoy it that you can keep doing it. And that's kind of where we found ourselves, which we're very lucky to be able to do.
Yeah, and something that I noticed about you and kind of what you guys are doing is in this world of like mental health. And I'm going to say this. I'm always going to preface this with, I think that there's a lot of uses of mental health that are it's just buzzword, right? What I'm really kind of talking about is the balancing act of doing what you love and the pressure of getting paid for it, and the
Sure.
investment and the all of the reasons why a person wakes up in the morning and does what they do, or goes to bed real late at night, or pushes for shows. And it seems like like I know that there's probably like a ebb and flow to how stressed out or how happy you are with things in the shop or whatever, but it seems at least like the foundation that you've been able to set with, we have this canvas, which is the knife that we do things on, like this idea of the design, right? And then you get to pull in materials that you think are cool, or you get to like handle material or blade material or things like that. To me, that seems like every day is like just a blossom of possibilities, versus it being
Yeah.
like for me in fixed blades, especially, I don't really think about marrying these materials together too aggressively. It's like I have scale sets of things, and I put them on a fixed blade, and I have this large area that I have to cover. I don't ever think about, well, what if I took all these little what I'd consider junk or unusable pieces and be able to stitch them together to make something. And to me, that
Sure.
seems exciting.
Yeah.
Like I think about what that would do to my creative process and being able to get a little bit outside of that comfort zone of like if there's a scale set and I slap it on that thing, that's pretty much like a one and done deal. But what if I open, you know,
Yeah, right. Comfort zone is a really good way to say that, right? Because in this process, fixed blades, no matter what you're making by hand. I mean, it's not just knives, but when you spent so much time making something, a knife, and then knowing that this last thing, pushing yourself that much further, that something you haven't done could screw up this whole process. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we go back and it's like, why didn't I just play this safe? I mean, I had this over here. This could have been done 4 hours ago if we just stopped and done it the way we've done it before. Why are we doing it this way? What kind of glutton for punishment am I that I'm continuing to do this, right? Um, and it, to step out of that comfort zone and keep doing it repeatedly, yeah, it's like you said, it looks like a lot of fun, right? It's like, oh, that's cool. You have this thing, but realistically, it really gets to be a lot. You learn lessons and you're learning it the hard way because you can't call somebody and say, hey, have you ever put some poured resin with some titanium? Like, how does that work, right? Um, we did that years ago. I remember the first time I did it. I mean, that's burned in my brain because obviously the titanium is going to get really hot, right? I mean, I'm going to grind this titanium. It's going to get hot. It's going to melt the resin. You can't put those two materials together and grind them, dummy. But I mean, there's always a way. If you have a desire to do it, you can work it out. But yeah, it's again, it goes back to like, hey, why are you even doing it in the first place? Those two things probably shouldn't go together. But it is fun, and when you find something new, anytime you take risk and it works, you found something new, hopefully, and other people can build on that, and you kind of keep pushing the industry, which is fun. I love being part of that. I think that's something that the knife community has in droves is, people that are willing to share their ideas and the things that they've done so you can do it too and push it a little bit further and compare notes. I know other industries that I enjoy very much that people aren't that way, right? Everybody in this industry is so closely paired that the little things that you do are such trade secrets that you can't go share them with anybody. And knife making is really not that way. So it's fun. It's fun to see that progression echo through the industry, right? If you're pushing things and other people start pushing things and how to use materials and how they're put together, yeah, you see that progression happen, and that's definitely I've seen our impact. Not that it's just us, lots of people have been doing this for years, but the little things that we've done that people are like, oh, that's cool. I think I can take that a little bit further, and that's fun. I like it. It's cool. I look forward to seeing more of it.
Yeah, well, and knives didn't always used to be that way either. I think we're in a renaissance period with maybe it's the pendulum swinging in the liberal share everything type of way, right? Because back in the day, it's like you'd have all these knife makers that really did treat finishing micarta in a certain way as being a trade secret, and then
Sure.
somebody gets a little bit mad because nobody wanted to share that information, and they're like, okay, well, if I learn this process, I'm going to do it. I'm going to dig my heels and I'm going to learn it, but then I'm going to tell absolutely every single person how to do that ever wants to know about it, and we're going to change the paradigm about how we think of trade secrets. Like
Yeah.
if I can reverse engineer it, then I'm just going to share it with everybody.
And yeah, I mean, definitely. What I've always said is just because I can explain it to you doesn't mean you're going to do it. Especially in trade craft things like this. I mean, I can explain our process in making knives to anybody, and you still have to fill in the blanks. It's not going to happen that way every time, and you're going to have to learn how to think on your feet to make it work. And that's 90. I mean, 90% of my day is trying to do the same thing we did last time and make it work the same way. I mean, it's really really difficult, and that's something that comes with time and experience, and you can't explain that to somebody. Sure, finishing my carta, right? That's a quick step that makes you stand out. If you're blasting it versus polishing it, and all of a sudden it comes out a different texture. Ooh, it's so cool. And I think people still hang on to those things because it's something you want to play a little bit closer for a while so that you can be known for it before you let it go. And I still see that happening. That's okay, but the aim is still, we've talked a lot about the superficial finishing stuff, but the aim is still to make a great knife. The cosmetic stuff can be cool, but unless the knife, I always tell people you have to hit the basics. It has to center, it has to lock, it has to have that nice crisp break, it's got to fall. All the things that that folding knife makers really love. You have to do all that stuff first, and then you can get into how does it look. And that's like I was saying earlier, it's sometimes we push it too far. You take a great knife that worked great and you try to do something silly to it, like add too much heat, and you ruined a very functional knife doing something you had no place doing, right? Like some veteran knife maker would look at you and say, "Why the hell did you do that? That was really stupid. You took something that worked and really messed it up," right? Um, uh, but yeah, I mean that's what presses everything, right? Pushes the industry a little bit.
Yeah.
But
It's like it's like telling children that they are not supposed to run before they learn how to walk.
yeah,
But what's interesting, I think, as a parent and also like in the creative process, is like, man, sometimes you have a kid that just learns how to run, and walking is just like, okay, well, it's just I'm just doing running slower.
yeah, yeah.
you know?
But there's always that, like, everybody. It's that second, intrinsic nature of like, well, my path was hard. Yours should be too. Why'd you skip a step?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's I think something that's difficult about being in a creative medium is gatekeepers. It always seems, and I don't, maybe it's something that I've just picked up on because it always seems like in my life there's always somebody that tells me no, and I'm people will tell me I'm a contrarian by nature. And so if if I see somebody that tells me no, I'm gonna like not only is it gonna be a yes, but I'm gonna do it in spite of you, and I'm gonna do it really audaciously.
yeah. I think a lot of very successful people have that nature about
Well, I don't know that I'm successful, but
them.
at the very least, I speak a little bit louder in rooms and try
There you go.
whatever. But like gatekeeping is one of those like really weird paradigms in knife making where you want to respect people because they say maybe slow down and learn this thing or whatever, but I'm going to say 50-50 chance that the person who's telling you to slow down is just so that you're not running ahead of them, as it is that they want you to learn fundamentals so that way you can go faster when you get to a certain point. It's really hard to determine intent and whether you have people who are really trying to mentor you or they're trying to get you to slow down because your competition is just too hot for them.
Yeah. Having had kids these days, it's one of those things like you could when you hand somebody the path, and I'm thinking of a couple makers off the top of my head that I've experienced that have taken a gift that a knife maker has given them, right? Not always made them earn, but a gift they have given them in the knowledge of their craft and swindled it, right? Absolutely run it into the ground because they didn't appreciate the value of what was being gifted to them. Um, and I think in lots of things, I think if more people went, and I think that's what they're trying to do is show you, not walk you through the path, but try to point out some obstacles along the way. And when we run down the path instead of paying attention to those things, we miss a lot. And it goes back to the problems in making knives. You can think that you got it all figured out, and you go sell something, and it doesn't lock right, or it doesn't do these fundamental things that have to happen because you didn't know enough to pay attention. Um, but when you do it yourself, they get into you. Like when I talk to my wife, sometimes it's a she'll tell me something three times, but until I ask, I'm not actually paying attention. Right? I mean, it's one of those things that unless you've learned it on the job, sometimes it doesn't actually sink in enough for you to apply it.
Yeah,
I think that has a lot to do with it. But yeah,
yeah.
I get it. I've never felt like I didn't have like a mentor in this. I mean, Shane from Scorpion Six shared a lot. Matt Westberg helped me a lot with some of the from Berg Blades, from some of the things, but nobody really, you know, held our hand and walked us through it. So, um, or for that matter, mentored us to the point where they were explaining what was going on. So, I think everybody has their own path. I wish somebody did, though, right? I wish I could have sat with somebody like Peter Carey or something and had him really, because it's so many things that I still haven't figured out that he has. I know, the little gems of experience that make all the difference. I wish I'd had that, but yeah, we just put a machine in the garage and started cutting things, which a lot of people do that too, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say that that kind of self-invention is really good, especially if you're not like losing digits or blinding yourself or inadvertently giving yourself like lung
Yeah.
cancer too early in the making process.
Hmm.
But and that's one thing I I I appreciate knife making now more than I think I would have 30 years ago. If simply for the fact that there is way there's way more that is accepted in terms of how you play with things, right? It's like there's one path to this, so there's one path to that, and it's all very regimented. And if you talk to a lot of the old timers, it's like this is the way that I learned because that was just the way that mentorship or whatever happened.
Yep.
And I'm not going to say it's like it's more basic because they had less tools and less knowledge, like collective knowledge. Like you had to go to books and everything. But now we have this like you can get a little bit from social media and see what's on people's benches and their Instagram photos, or
Yeah.
you can see who they follow for certain materials or what they're using. You can kind of it's all about like espionage at this point as a maker. And if somebody doesn't specifically tell you, there's still artifacts of how to do those things.
Sure.
And if you think a little bit outside of yourself and a little bit outside of that box, you really can actually like gain a lot of knowledge without having to ask anybody or suffer the humility of being told no.
Yeah. No, I agree. I absolutely. Yeah. It's I mean, again, it's a lot of how we learned how to do this was watching people's Instagrams and being, the super sleuth. Oh, look, he screws the blade down during that process, or, the turntable. Here's how he centers it. Kind of little tips and tricks like that. Absolutely, 100%. I always say I don't know how knife makers made a living before social media, before technology, right? I mean, just selling the product, and it's so hard to make anything, but especially knives in a garage or in a shop by yourself. um, you, there's positives and negatives, right? You push yourself harder sometimes because you want it perfect and you don't know what the other standards are, which is cool. Or the other side is you just don't realize the presence of what other people are doing, right? Like we're inundated with what keeps me motivated to keep pushing is because I know what everybody else is doing and I see their product and it's like, oh, let's go harder, right? Let's do more. Um, which is good and bad. I mean, this we're talking about social norms these days that could be positive and negative on our society, that you know pluses and minuses. But it's interesting. I certainly wouldn't be able to do it without it. We wouldn't be able to sell knives. I wouldn't be in this industry if without the technology and the social media and the little things like that I've latched onto.
Yeah, I mean, I, I don't know if I'd agree with that statement in the sense that you're a creative guy. And I think that, like, regardless of whether you had very basic materials and equipment, you still have that spark that way. Like, if you wanted to do it, there's nobody that could tell you no, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but that's an interesting paradigm because, like, when I look at the old guard about CNC and well you're not actually making the knife or whatever, I'm like pish posh. Like I don't believe that at all. Like I mean I've been in IT since I was a kid, and if people told me that using AI to help program stuff was going to be cheating, I'd tell you to blow smoke, right? But it's like it's a tool that helps to change the dynamic of how I'm able to ideate and iterate on things,
Sure.
right? And like I don't embrace it because I want AI to be our overlords. I embrace it because right now AI is actually really stupid and it's not intelligent. It's a glorified search engine,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But in the same way, like I know, dude, you could not get me to touch CNC and programming machines or anything like that. It just seems so over the top difficult. Like I just, coming from like I do program some things and whatnot, but all of that is it's within this like world of IT and server management and hosting. It's not like it's not doing operations on a machine, and I couldn't figure it out. So I have a lot of respect for people who just can toil away at figuring out that stuff and messing up a bunch of things because I I don't have the sact for it.
Same, absolutely. I tried. I tried to learn G code and all that stuff. I just my brain, you know, the, even 3D modeling, which I'm okay at. I'm not great at. I can get by a little bit, but um, I get so irritated. You know, I'm trying to put these surfaces together, and it tells me oh no, I'm sorry, those surfaces don't mesh. It's like, let me show you. I'll take you over to the grinder, right? I will show you that those two surfaces match. I can do it right now. And that frustrates me a lot. So yeah, I have an extreme respect for the CNC guys. I would love to be able to do it. I just I physically cannot. I'm sure someday I will learn a little bit, but currently I have a reverence for it because it's a lot of work. I mean, that's a lot of fine tuning, and you can't shoe what do they call it? It's not shoestring, but you can't like wedge that in there, right? You can't
Yeah,
fake it. It's
shoehorn.
shoehorn. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can't shoehorn that part in there because it's not going to fit. But yeah, it's it's a lot, man.
Well, yeah, and I like I've heard the rhetoric before. It's like, well, but once you do figure it out, it's always like there's something else. There's some other reason to be contrary, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But
But then it
but
just
it's like,
works.
yeah, it just works, and you can make 1,000 of them, and you just had to spend that small amount of time. I was like, no, 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 you don't
Yeah,
understand how material operations and
yeah.
tooling and all those things
Right.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it. You take a very basic, like old school pantograph, right? I mean, they're very common. They're more common now in slip joints and pocket knives than they ever have been, right? But you take the same material, well, the same tool, and you try to do the same thing on different material, and you find out pretty quickly that things change
Yep.
constantly. It's
True.
like I can't do like hard materials and soft materials with the same cutters and the same styluses, and they don't fit the same and all those things. And if that's the way it is with pantographs, which is a very like ancient form of CNC, as it were, right? I mean, what makes you think it would work on a very fast, very expensive machine where everything costs an exceptional amount just to get down to like the specificity that you're trying to get to?
Do you have a pantograph?
Yeah, I have
Oh,
two.
I'm jealous, dude. I've almost bought one multiple times, but I hear it's kind of like having a hot rod. You got to really love it. It doesn't always work for you.
Yeah, if you ever really want to understand pantographs real well, talk to Tim Robertson,
Yeah.
up in Oklahoma. I think he's pretty well single-handedly brought back the pantograph. It used to be very, very, very niche, but he started to collect them and rebuild them and then sell them. I don't think he does it so much anymore. But when it comes to knowledge on just how to use them, it's pretty incredible. But something about pantographs is, the you have very simple pantographs, and I was actually familiar with pantographs from my days in jewelry because the very small ones you can do engraving with,
Yeah,
and
I have a little
so
one over here actually.
yeah, I forget what there's a few manufacturers that made them back in the day, right? But they do not handle being able to cut out pockets or things like that very well. But then you get to like the mid tier, which is still two dimensional, like the Gorton P1-2s, which you probably see a little bit more often. And they do well, but everything kind of like how well it translates your pattern to the work has a lot to do with how mechanically sound it is, and how you're setting it up with the cutters and everything, right? And so there's even though it's pretty exact, it's also not that exact. And then you get up to the 3D model ones and the big ones like the decals and everything, and you have more ability to do kind of what you're doing, but it still is like a slow as she goes type of thing. Like you may as well just invest the money in a CNC machine to do it, because at the point where you get into like that 3-dimensional side of a pantograph, it really has it's like everything on a pantograph is like Kentucky windage. You just
Yeah,
gotta kind of like
sure.
aim it in a direction and shoot,
Yep.
and hopefully you learn enough about it where you can get pretty precise. But there's a lot of variability,
Yeah.
way more than I would appreciate.
Well, I'm glad I didn't buy one then because that would just frustrate. I mean, obviously, with all these machines, you learn them over time, right? The little things, the little nichey things, um, but yeah, I love the possibilities, right? The inlays and the things like that. I mean, I thought that would be a lot of fun, but yeah, sounds like sounds like a lot of fun. I don't necessarily need, but if I need one, I know where to find you.
Yeah. Well, if I'm gonna say like putting my consultation hat on here, I think that it would be really cool for you because of what you can do with inlays and things, and also if you have the ability to do like like 3D printing for all of your models, right, and all your patterns that you want to do, and then you can translate that to different materials, you can make it work. The thing is like if you have the space, you probably want to go with like a three-dimensional one just so that you have the ability to do contouring and other things that come off of your 3D models. But if you can pair those together, you can really come up with a lot of lot of interesting concepts, and it is worth the investment. I mean, they're not so expensive. You can get a three-dimensional pantograph usually for under 5 grand.
There's always more tools, man. You never have enough
Yeah.
tools.
Yeah. If you have the space for it, it's different. Like I would probably keep out of the two Gortons that I have, I'd keep one of the Gortons. I'd sell the other one and I would get a three-dimensional, either Gorton or Decal. But I work out of a two-car garage, basically. It's a little oversized, and I could not fit that in with everything else that I have. So,
Yep, yep. That's the thing.
yeah, that means yes, space. There's always a question. Like, and they don't require an exceptional amount of maintenance. Like they have the good thing about pantographs versus I think CNCs in some ways is that all those things are manual with your models or patterns or things that you can go off of. The fundamentals of the machine are pretty simplistic in a lot
Right.
of ways.
Yeah. No,
You know,
I mean that's it's kind of that concept of like I just want to get in there and do it, right? I mean that's one of the things about the CNC that makes me nervous is it's over there doing it by itself and I'm not involved. So the pantograph seems a lot more hands-on. So someday I'll play with it a little bit. But like you said, I mean, probably better to just go the CNC route and invest in that, which we did a couple of years ago. I couldn't make it work for us, but at some point we'll have to go down that path. That just seems the natural progression. That we just enjoy making. I like making things with my hands. I enjoy standing in front of the grinder in the morning and you know uh, playing with contouring and sanding that Fordite. I also find that sometimes processes like that or machines or 3D models, you end up designing for for your design, for your level on CAD, for your level of understanding of CNC. You're trying to make things that work within your level of understanding versus being more creative, which is what I enjoy about the handmade, right? If I come up with an idea, I can go over to the grinder and sit there and play with it until I get what I want out of it versus trying to, like I said earlier, I'm terrible at surfacing in CAD. Rather than the CAD model telling me I can't do that, so I figure out something else to do. Nice to be able to go over to the grinder and do it, but um, double-edged sword, right?
well, yeah. I mean, I I worked on I was working on some prototyping stuff with Klein Tools. Was it last year? Maybe it was earlier this year or last year. And it was a pretty cool deal because I mean Klein Tools, a lot of people know them, especially if you're linemen.
Yeah,
And they're one of their facilities is located in Mansfield, Texas, which is like right down the road from
I
me.
didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah. They'd been moving some stuff up from like the upper Midwest. I think they had some factory stuff in, and they've been slowly moving some operations down to this other location. But other than the stuff that is covered under NDA stuff because they all like keeping buttoned lips about it. It
Sure.
was basically just a process of grinding some prototype blades, and the cool thing about it is that I actually got a perspective into how industrial manufacturing works for cutting tools and things that I just had zero idea about. But in the prototype phase, like that's the same mentality. They're like, okay, well, we could design all this stuff out, but in order to get it productized,
Yeah.
first we got to know whether somebody wants it, and we got to do that. Like we got to make it first, and then once we know that it's like it's theoretically possible and the lessons are learned from that, then we can figure out how to engineer it into a production line.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was
And
one of my favorite things about industrial design was, well, favorite and least. I like designing with constraints, right? I mean, as much as I like to go over to the grinder and do it myself, it's nice to be able to say, okay, this is not possible on that scale. I love that stuff. I mean, yes, as a one-off or as a small batch CNC knife, this works great. But if you're going to do it at scale, it's a little bit more difficult kind of thing. I would love to know more about grinding too. That industrial grinding, that's fascinating to me because I don't know how some of these larger like the overseas China companies, how are they grinding these things? I get the general idea. I've been exposed to it a little bit, but I'd love to know more about that. That's cool that you got exposed to that.
yeah, well, I know very little about it. If you want to talk to somebody who is learning that process, Lucas Cow from Squid Industries.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they actually, when I talked to him on the podcast several months ago, they had purchased a machine. It was being built, I think, in Germany
Oh, cool. Yeah.
or somewhere like
I
that.
hear all the
And
best ones
then,
are German. Yeah, I've heard that.
yeah, this goes to show. But the the training and stuff like that they were doing, but he's like, if you know of anybody who has some like details on how to run this thing, let me know. We purchased it and we're waiting on it to ship and everything. But I think by now, I haven't talked to him recently, but they're actually going down that path of being able to do all their frames and whatnot, and then also be able to industrially grind their blades
Yeah.
for their non-trainers. And probably by now he knows a little bit more about it, assuming that he received the machine and they're working with it. But
I mean, it goes back to what we're saying. So, I mean, one of the things I've experienced with the more commercial companies that use commercial grinders like that, and again, the reason I want to know more is that a lot of the designs I come up with, sometimes they say, oh, we can't grind that on our machine, right? I can do it by hand because I'm sitting there feathering it, but our machine doesn't do that. So I'd love to know more about that so I can speak to them on it, right? Oh, yes, this is how this works, but it goes back to that, you can only design for so much because the machine isn't capable of doing it. Whereas I can do it by hand over here, right? Um, yeah, just one of those things. I, I strive to know more so that I can make what I want.
yeah, and the larger thing that I've been able to glean from it is that you have your grinding wheel that makes its passes and everything to remove the material, but there are certain types of geometry that it can and can't perform. So maybe it'd be able to do some compound grinding or things like that, but there's in the geometric plane of what the machine is capable of moving around, like, and what's industrially available. That's kind of the thing.
Yeah,
So maybe what you're going to have to do is pull in some of that industrial design knowledge and everything, and custom build a machine to
sure.
do all the grinding.
There you go.
And,
That's it right there. I mean, but
yeah,
that's how you progress, right? You learn more about it. You say, hey, what if it did this? And then you got to go do that stuff. There's enough people that want it, then the industry moves and progresses. But yeah, yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I don't expose myself to that stuff enough.
well, I'm interested. You say we a lot, yeah, when it comes in the context of knives, right? And I'm interested to know with Keanison Knives, who comprises the team, and how does the relationship between you and what you have brought to the business, and then the rest of your team, like what is that dynamic like?
The collective we as in the group. No, yeah. So it's just Will and I. Will Walker is my buddy and partner in all this. Will does all the machining. So back to the original story, I started Keanison with a friend of mine. Um, my background was in industrial design, so I kind of sparked the idea. I came up with the logo, the name, and we started on the Stray was our first design. Well, I say our was my first design. It was the first knife I ever ideated, which is really cool. But a lot of ignorant things came from that, things that I didn't know when I designed my first knife that I know now. So we started with the Stray, and Will joined us very early on in our process, probably the first 2 years. He came in and started doing all our machining. Will didn't have a big history in industrial machining. He was a professional welder, so he knew metal a little bit, but we brought him in and he learned real fast. Put him in front of our Grizzly mini mill, and he just went to town. So Will's been working with me for a long time now, so it's just the two of us here in the shop. And I say we, just because we do everything together. I do all the design, I do the finish work, Will does the machining, I do the grinds, we do lockup and detent together. I do lockup, he does detent. So we just have a good vibe going. We have a good back and forth. We, I try to do all the clerical stuff. I do all the design. I design all the stickers, all the branding, all the hats and stuff like that. So um, I do the marketing and things like that as well. But yeah, it's just the two of us. Um, he's as much a part of this as I am. I couldn't do it without him. Um, at least on the handmade side, wise, I love designing knives. It's something that I hope to do more of. Um, if you look at our catalog, like we don't really repeat things. Two things don't necessarily look the same, which I enjoy. I like pushing. When I design knives, it's like what style do I want to do? I want to do a stiletto, or I say that because that's something I'd like to do. But something cool and or the Fido that we came out with. It's kind of I call it a gentleman folder. We were talking about that earlier. Just kind of a smaller, what your dad used to carry kind of knife. Um, so I like designing in those constraints like that. But yeah, it's the two of us here every day, man. He's my work wife. We work in pretty much the same space all day, every day. We don't talk very much, honestly. I work in our warehouse is pretty big. We have a dirty room on the other side over there. I'm in the office now, and Will works in between in kind of the machine area. So we say hi in the morning. I go to my dirty room. I sit in there for 6 hours and work on knives. Come back in, tell a joke or two, see where he's at, what he's up to, and we kind of get back to it. It's almost like we're doing it by ourselves, but we have a good back and forth, good communication. You kind of get together every week and go back and forth on what we need to do and what little changes we need to make, and it's fun, man. It's hard to work with people. It's not everybody are compatible, but Will and I do very well. He also helps very much on the creative side. We talk about the materials being a main part of our business. When we started out, it was definitely me doing a lot of like, hey, here's what we're going to build, but we've gotten a good back and forth. Like I said, good communication. So I'll say, hey, Will, what do you think of this? Or hey, what I'm kind of hit a wall here, pick up some materials and try to figure something out. And he does great. I mean, he's got a couple builds going right now of material combinations he came up with, and so it's fun. There's lines here and there. Like I said, I do all the finish work and the grinds. So we usually will do all the machining during the week. Friday we do lockup and detent, whatever he did that week. And then Saturday I come in and start grinding. I usually do the profiling and contouring, and then do like the primary bevel on the blade and try to do all the cleanup of the blades on the third wave there. Um, and then finishing, polishing, anodizing, all that stuff. I do all that, but then tuning too. Will's great at the tuning. Folding knives take a lot of kind of like love there at the end to get them just where you want them. A little bit more lock bar, a little bit more of this. So he helps me with that a lot because sometimes, like we say, it's hard to make things in a garage by yourself. You're not always exposed to the outside world. You kind of get in your own head. You play with something for 4 hours and finally, like, you know what, I need to step away from this, or I'm just going to drive it into the ground. So it's really nice to have somebody else in the shop to bounce things like that off of. And yeah, we work really well, very well together. So
Yeah, and that's a rare combination, I think, in the creative space, to be able to find somebody that you can be creative by yourself, but then also be creative as a team,
yeah,
and then also and also work through the fundamentals of like getting stuff done. Because if everybody is an artist, then everybody is also a prima donna, and very difficult to work with. And so
yeah.
it's nice to be able to have that dynamic where you can like both be physical and do the work, and then also be creative and help with like the conceptuals of things. It's a rare thing to find,
It
and
is.
even rare that
And we, you know,
yeah.
you joke about work wife, but it's a very similar to that, right? I mean, it's like being married. I mean, I spend a lot more time in here in the shop with Will than I do with my wife most days during the week. And and you can get on each other's nerves, and but yeah, to find somebody whose personality, you know, he's very different than I am. You talk about the prima donna thing. I think I'm the prima donna. I think he deals with my artistic side here and there. Will's, and it's nice. It's nice to have that compliment. Will's very much the let's get things done kind of guy, right? Like, hey, get off that. Like you're overcomplicating it. We just need to make a knife here, right?
Yeah.
Which is really nice to have. It's I I'm grateful for that quite a bit because I probably would drive a lot of things off the ledge sometimes.
Yeah, well, and I know that because I've been divorced once and remarried a second time. So I mean, you sometimes are not always compatible,
Yeah,
and it's nice to be able to have that and to nurture that, because once you get that secret sauce, it's kind of off to the races, and I can definitely appreciate that. Um, when it comes to tooling and things like that, so you talked a lot about a mix of new technology and whatnot. All the grinding right now you guys are doing by hand, and it is a single piece at a time. Like you're not doing any batching at all.
nope, no, I'm sorry, I'm nodding my head on we're on
Podcast.
yeah,
We're on an
sorry,
audio only podcast.
I forget. No, yes, we do them single at a time. Sometimes, sometimes we'll have two, especially if we're getting ready for a show or something where like we have two of the same model we're taking. So I try to batch them a little bit so I can set up the grinder and do the grinds all at the same time. But yeah, primarily we just do one-off stuff. We have I think we have nine different models that we offer right now, and for lots of different reasons. A lot of it is the materials, right? I mean, it's hard to come up with six different ways to do one model versus, oh, this material would look really good on this one, whereas this would look really good over here. Let's do each one. Um, and we just kind of fall into that groove where we just we make what we want when we want to make it. The only thing that we are batching right now, and I'm looking at them right now, is we have our Stray 2.0, which is a CNC knife from Jim Vandevelt, HMC Knives. So we're doing, hopefully 10 at a time of those. So that's the only thing that we batch right now. But otherwise, the handmades are all one off, um, which again I enjoy. I don't mind that. I mean, some of the knives we grind freehand. So like our K9 model and our Alpha Pup are freehand grinds, no jig, no table. And then a lot of the newer ones that we're doing involve jig grinding. So when you're doing the hand grind, freehand grinding, it really doesn't matter if you're batching or not, right? You're just burning the same parts of your finger. Um, so it didn't really help. But now that we're doing some of the jig grinding stuff, I see the promise in it. But yeah, man, I really enjoy. I don't find that it helps my process to do multiples at the same time. It doesn't, like, I end up speeding through it, thinking that I already did it. Let's just do it again, and screwing up things that I probably wouldn't and shouldn't have done, you know, previously. Um, but yeah, no, yeah, all one off. I don't I don't know why I'm such a glutton for punishment, but that's what we do.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's things like that interest me because I think about the economics of running a shop, right? And the customer demand and all those things. Like when we talk about knives as a business,
Sure.
doing things at your level on a one by one perspective has its constraints from how much money you can make out of a single knife, and how much expansion you can do, and so on and so forth. And so I think it's interesting to me.
I mean, I guess it does. I don't know. I've played with this many different ways, right? I mean, it's one of those things. I think part of what's fun about somebody making handmade one-off knives is that it's a personalized thing, right? And I don't mean that it used to be when we did customs, you would tell me what you wanted, but still to think that the person making the knife spent the time and the detail to just build that one, right? It kind of loses a little bit of luster when it's like, oh, this was a and don't get me wrong, I still love. I mean, more power to anybody doing that. I wish I was, but it loses its luster a little bit in your brain when it's like, oh, it was one of this batch, right? Um, I still like that idea that somebody spent the time and I mean, I literally have a relationship with each one. I spend a few days a week in that knife, in every detail and every little nook and cranny of it, not saying, okay, I got that done, put it to the side and get to the next one kind of thing. Um, and again, I think that's what, handmade customs are. It's that, that time, and each one has a personality. You're donating to that knife. Um, and I'm not so much a fixed blade collector, so I can't speak to that as much. But with folding knives, they have a personality. Some of them fall a little bit lighter. Some of them have a crisper detent. Some of the locks are a little bit further, or a little bit earlier. I mean, each knife has a little bit different vibe to it, and some you speak to, it's like, oh, that one's great. And others, that's not really my style. I like a little harder detent. I like a little this. Um, and that's where a lot of the production stuff, for me, is a little bit sterile. When you look at, especially, and we have our first China production knife out right now that I'm packing up over here. This knife is so good. I mean, it does everything I want it to do. It's such a crisp detent, and it breaks right where, and it falls, and the lock is so solid. It is so good that it's almost sterile, right? Like, it's almost personalityless. This one is the same as the next one, is the same as the last one. And it's awesome that way, right? Because everybody gets that thing that they want. Everybody gets the cool action and all that. But at the same time, it's almost, not what you're looking for when you say this is a handmade product. Sure, you want it to do all those things, but you also want to know that the guy making it took the time to spend it, to put that personality in it, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I get that, and it's an interesting dynamic between presenting products that are mass produced is the wrong word, but like batched production
Yeah.
grade products and handmade, because you have this paradigm where I see it more now. Like Enrique Pina was a good example of being able to take these really phenomenal slip joints that he made by hand and being able to convert that into a production methodology and whatnot.
He's such an awesome guy. He does great with it. I love all the things that Enrique makes. Every design he comes out with, every knife he comes out with is one that I would totally carry. And yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, very very seldom do you pick up a knife maker's production and then go back to his handmade and say they are like they're equally awesome, right? Like these things are like the handmade is exceeding my expectations because it's so good. I feel that pressure a lot, when you're going to do a production model of something, it's going to hit all those boxes, and you're like, oh man, there's always that pressure. Am I doing everything that I can to make it that awesome, right? There's just so many aspects to folding knives that I enjoy, but also lament, right? It's like I, when they don't behave the way I want them to, when that detent's not breaking right where I want it, or it did earlier and now it's not. It's a very emotional process. I go through the ringer every day. I picked up
Yeah.
mountain biking because I had to do something after work to like, oh my God, I gotta let this go. But when it works, man, when it all comes together and that knife is just what you want, it's so rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah. Knife making is a process of shooting yourself in the foot all the time and pretending that you can still walk.
Sure, absolutely, yeah, and then not crying about it because nobody really wants to hear about it.
Yeah, it's like, well, you did it to yourself. It's like you ever see that meme where somebody's like riding in a bicycle and they put a stick between their own spokes? It's like that. They're
Just like
complaining
that.
about it.
It's
It is
just like
exactly.
that. But man, it's so much fun. We're talking poorly about it, but I just love it. I mean, I love everything about it. I still very much enjoy my day. I love being able to, I love that other people enjoy it. Is the best part of it. So
Yeah. Um, so, that something that I've kind of noticed through social media is you have like these different models that you do and these different things that you try. And I would say by and large, like my perception at least is that everybody like really likes what you're doing, right? Like I don't get a lot of the visibility where you have big duds or anything like that, but maybe you're just good at curating the failures
are you
over the
speaking specifically about us?
yeah, yeah, about you.
I thought we were talking about us as a collective.
Oh no, no, nobody cares about me. Talking about you, buddy.
Okay, all right. So the question, was word that for me again?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that like the secret sauce of like you guys creating things and trying out different material combinations and what you're putting out there, it just seems like there's a lot of support for what you guys are doing. And again, like I know that there's all those behind the scene failures and things that maybe me as like looking in the social media side of things does not get to see as much, but it seems like at least that people are picking up what you're throwing down, and to me that's actually really encouraging because what you guys are doing is very unique to your aesthetic and what you're trying to bring to the industry, and to be able to have the validation of not only people in your collector space, but then also winning awards and things like that too, for what those are worth. It seems like you guys are doing pretty well.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's awesome. I mean, it's one of those things, like you said. I mean, nobody ever sees the trials and tribulations that lead to that point, right? I mean, you just kind of look at the end game and say, hey, look, how great. It's taken a long time. It's definitely we set goals for ourselves. Just something that was kind of ingrained in me as a kid is, you gotta if you don't set goals for yourself, you're kind of just driving blind. So we try to set goals for ourselves, Will and I, every year, just to say, here's what we want to do this year. And if we don't get there, we're kind of falling short. And a lot of it has to do with pushing ourselves and spending the time and effort to do things better. But yeah, I mean, I consider it very lucky. My buddy Israel, Arcane Design, he was out here, I think it was over a year ago now, but we were just talking about knife designs and how to do new things. And you always feel the pressure. You never know if people are going to like it. Like our Fido model, I'm going to bring it up again. It's something different than we've done ever before. I mean, it's like nothing else in our catalog, and I didn't know how people were going to receive it, and it so far pretty well. But I mean, it hasn't really. I'm shipping today, so we'll see how much people like them. But there's always a risk that it's like, this wasn't what I expected or wasn't what I wanted. So it's certainly not a foregone conclusion. I mean, um, I wouldn't say people just consume it, but yeah, back to Israel's story, he said that all our designs kind of have a vibe. They all have kind of a common thread, which I don't see. Again, when I design a knife, it's like here's something totally different that I've never done, and I want to see what I can do with it. And I guess because it comes from my notebook, it has a similar vibe because I'm doing them all. But at the same time, I don't necessarily see the common thread in all of them from my perspective. And it was cool for another designer to sit there and be like, no, I definitely could pick them out of a lineup, which one you did versus somebody else. Which is a huge compliment to me, as just a knife fan that likes designing knives, right? I like sketching them. I love the process of designing folding knives. It's so specific. Because once you think you have a good shape, I sketch everything by hand first. You can have this great speed form. It's like, oh, this blade's great and the handle shape's awesome. and then you put it in. I put it in Illustrator. I just trace them out on Illustrator, and I try to make the blade fold into the handle. And there's no freaking way you're gonna fit this really cool blade in this really slim handle, right? It's just not feasible. So then you spend the next 4 hours playing with shapes and trying to drag things around, trying to get from your original concept as much as you can out of that to the final form, because folding knives are very much dictated by the function. And I enjoy that very much. I think that that's such a cool aspect of folding knives, that you have to, it has to do this. It can't just be whatever. And some of the challenges from, and I don't know him very well, Tough Knives. I don't know if you follow. I don't even know his first name because I've never met him, but such a great knife designer. And I see in his designs a lot of things that I've come up with that I couldn't get to work, right? I couldn't get that to fold. I couldn't get that to nest. And he does. And it's like, wow, that's so cool that he can do that. I have huge respect for that. So yeah, it's, I love that aspect of it. And I the creative side of knives. And I'm glad that I'm glad that I have a vibe, but yeah, it's, every design is kind of I hope people like this. It's never a foregone conclusion. Like, oh, they're just going to be into it. But yeah, I appreciate that. It's fun to hear it from an outside perspective, because for me, it's just making knives, man. It's like I like the vibe. I want to design things I want to carry.
Yeah, well, and I think, well, I mean, they say perception is reality, right? But I mean, I keep going back. I think I have to iterate on this fairly often, but that's one of the enigmas of knife making that really kind of caused me to do this podcast, because I was struggling. I was really struggling to try to find my way inside of knives, and I'm like, well, I talked to all these people about different stuff and, like, bounce ideas off of them, and the industry is really great for being a sounding board, except that I have an inherent distrust of what everybody tells me.
Sure. Yeah.
And so there's a portion of it where I'm like, I don't know whether this is right for me. And I don't know whether this is right based on the context that I exist inside of the industry or whatever. And so, what I notice is that there's this big question mark around what causes people to be creative, and what gets them into knives in their facet, and what's their perspective on things. And I said, if I understand more about what those threads are, maybe I'll be able to find my own,
Sure.
right? That I wasn't just making knives to make knives. I wasn't just, replicating patterns that I've seen in the past, or using materials that, I quasi like, or responding to customers who want specific things out of me. But I just really want to kind of like discover what my own thread is.
Yeah.
And, and so there's the eclecticism that you have inside of this mechanical constraint of a folding knife, right? A very specific type of pattern, or mechanical process, and then you kind of expound on materials and your designs and everything. It's very reminiscent of Frank Lloyd Wright, architecturally, right? If you think about Frank Lloyd Wright's different applications of his architecture,
Yeah.
you notice that there are things that are always him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then whether he's making an office building, whether he's doing a ritzy, like Falling Water in Pittsburgh area,
Sure.
you see that he's working within the constraints of the medium, but then he's also applying his aesthetic to it. And that I don't know if necessarily think that, well, that was his style, but he was pushing for certain things in his head, and that just comes out in the work.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate that, in what y'all do. Like the Alpha Pup, for instance, is one of my favorite designs of y'all's.
Thank
And it doesn't matter what configuration I see it in. It's just there's something about it that I just genuinely like. And one day I will buy one of them from you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's definitely the most recognizable design that we've done. And I love Frank Lloyd Wright, by the way. I totally understand what you're saying. If he's doing a house in Arizona in the mountains and he's trying to blend it in with that, you can see his style versus doing one in the mountains. It it stands out. So I totally understand what you're talking about. Um, but yeah, it's the Alpha. Everybody seems to really enjoy that knife. Even they said that the age of the cleaver knife in knives was kind of dead, right? People were really into cleavers back then. The rad cleaver we mentioned, and all that stuff people loved. And we did that knife a couple years later, and it was kind of like, oh, I don't know if people are gonna like it. But I drew it. I drew that knife in on vacation with my wife years ago, and I think it was our first honeymoon. And I drew it. I was sitting by the pool sketching the blade shape, and it was one of those like, oh man, that's it. Like I know that's going to be cool. I love that. So I was really confident in that design when we came up with it. But yeah, you still never know, right? I mean, like I said, it was everyone was like, people are kind of over cleavers, which is it's more of a sheep's foot, I guess. Um, but it was one of those like I don't know how it's going to be received because it's kind of an oversaturated type style at the time. But it's kind of it's I mean, it's been years now, so it's held the test of time. But yeah, I'm glad you like it, man. I really have you ever seen one in person?
No,
Oh,
actually, I haven't.
we'll have to work that out. And then before we did the Alpha Pup, we did the full size Alpha, which is a much larger version of that,
Hmm.
which people really like too. They sold very quickly, but the Pup is a more manageable model. But yeah, man, it's cool. I'd like to do more variations of it down the road. Kind of keep that general shape and see what else we can do with it.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the, I guess maybe when I looked at it, maybe it's reminiscent somewhat of a cleaver, but some of the things that I look at in that design is I really like the grind lines and how that fits into the proportions of the blade. It's actually very reminiscent of a straight razor. If you
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah,
if you look at the contour of the grind, and how it thins out. That to me looks really cool. But then also it's reminiscent of like the Japanese style choppers, like the Nikiri or whatever. And there's kind of like a bunch of different aesthetic elements that I see in that really make it tasty to me. And I don't really know how to describe it, but it's not just one thing, right? It
yeah,
doesn't represent, like, you can't necessarily call it a sheep's foot or a cleaver or like a straight razor or whatever. It just has a elements that married in their proper proportion just speaks in a complex way. And I think that isn't that like what you do.
yeah, yeah. And to go back to what we were talking about earlier, that's I think it's one of those things that wouldn't necessarily have happened if I had had some mentorship, right? If I'd been under that old guard we were talking about earlier of the guys passing the torch of like, oh no, you can't do that, right? You can't do that grind up at that angle. It's not going to work that way. Which, trust me, when like the Stray, those those grinds are designed out of ignorance. Neither one are easy to do, and they're probably super counterintuitive to what actual knife make like what the old guard would say that you should do with a knife. But out of the lack of influence and my ignorance and you know, having not spent a lot of time by the time I designed that knife building them by hand, I just, I'm so stubborn that I'm going to do it anyway, right? It's like, no, you shouldn't do that. Well, I shouldn't, but I really want to, and I'm stubborn enough to put in the time to try to figure out how to get it done. So, um, yeah, I think that that's cool, that we can push things a little bit like that, but certainly would have been easier to just do a straight across, straight grind across the bottom of it. But yeah, cool. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. It's a fun knife to make. We only make 100 of each design, so we're coming up to the end of that, and I'm gonna miss making it.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I've heard something about that, and so I'm kind of like, maybe there's always the aftermarket.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But again, at some point, I'm gonna have to bring it back because I love specifically that knife. The Stray, the first knife I made, the first version I didn't like. The newer ones we make, I have all the changes, so I'm enjoying it again. But I love the Alpha. It's some knives are hard to make it lock up. Some knives are hard to make, break properly. Some knives are hard to make fall. That Alpha Man, that it's just that design, something about it just works so well that at some point we'll have to bring it back.
Yeah. Well, um, I'm interested. I saw that Neil Kamimura was at your shop.
Yeah.
It was the Alpha that he was interested in making, correct?
Yep. Yep. We made an Alpha. Neil made an Alpha. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Did you know Neil before that experience with him wanting to come in and talk in your shop, or kind of what was the relationship like that there?
Yeah, so I met Neil at Blade Show Atlanta 3 or 4 years ago. Again, COVID years are kind of, it's probably been 4 years now, um, maybe four plus. Knife industry small, man. Neil's a cool guy. We have a mutual friend, Hawks Nest, my buddy Matt, that I keep mentioning. He sells material to pretty much everybody. So, and again, not, the knife community is small. So, yeah, we chatted a little bit before we hung out in Atlanta, um, one year, just him and his son and his crew, and talked a little bit. And I love what he does. He's such an amazing creative guy. I remember watching him on Forged in Fire and stuff too. So I'm a little, you know, I'm a, I was a little starstruck hanging out with him. He's a cool guy. But yeah, we struck up a friendship in Atlanta, and we used to talk on the phone every once in a while. He's always interested in sharing, like we talk about sharing ideas, right? I mean, he's always, especially when I'm etching carbon steel, he always hits me up and is like, "Hey, I figured out a new trick," because etching carbon steel is such a pain in the ass, man. Excuse me, that was my slip there, my one slip. Uh, making for etching carbon steel is an art, right? I mean, it's a labor of love, and you really have to spend the time to to develop a method for it. And he really has him in I forget his name off the top of my head, but they spent so much time going back and forth trying to figure out a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And so we had developed a friendship over the years. And he was in town that weekend. I didn't know he was going to be here, and he called me up that morning and was like, "Hey, I'm in Austin. I want to make knives." And I said, "Okay." So I drove out and picked him up, and actually, he didn't say he wanted to make knives. He just said he wanted to hang out. So I brought him to the shop, and I was like, "Well, what do you want to do? You want to go get some lunch or something?" He goes, "Well, I want to make knives. I want to make folding knives." I was like, "Oh crap. Okay, well, let's. How much time you got?" He's like, "Well, I got today." So it was one of those. Okay, let's see what we got around the shop, and we had some alpha parts sitting around. I had a blade. That was a full size alpha too. That wasn't even the pup. So we had retired the design. I was like, well, if Neil wants to make an alpha, we make Neil an alpha, right?
Yeah, Neil gets what he wants.
Right. Neil gets what he wants. So I had all those materials just sitting around the shop. The blade was ready, and we worked. I mean, I think we left the shop about 11:30. He got here about, yeah. We went about 12 hours on that knife straight. And we had already had the blade heat treated and cut and everything, so it was just assembly and sanding and finishing and stuff. And then we etched it, and he came back the next morning and we put it together. But it was a really fun project. It was really fun to see the contrast. Like as a handmade, as a folding knife maker, everything's got to be square, right? I mean, you look at a folding knife and the blade's got to sit and all this stuff. So I have my horizontal grinder where I'm sitting there with the wheel, and zero, this is a 90, everything's square. Okay, let's profile. And so I put Neil in there with the knife, and I'm like, okay, here's how I do it. And he's hacking at this thing, and he's like, "No, I'm not doing this." So he went over to the vertical grinder. He just turned it up to 80 and sit there and lays in it like a fixed blade maker, right? Like, just sits on it till all the material's gone, and he's like, "That's about square. That'll work." And I'm like, "Neil, are you sure you don't want to square it?" "No, no, it's close enough, man." I'm like, but it was really fun to see that. And even, he ground the blade, he did the whole thing. So it was fun to kind of give my input on it and then see him take it and put his spin on it, which Neil's always going to put his spin on everything. That's who he is. But that was a fun experience. Yeah, yeah, it was cool to have him in the shop. But he's a good buddy, man. He we talked quite a bit. We also did a kitchen folding knife. Yeah. So the year before that, actually, before he came to the shop, we did his show in Sacramento. Um, uh, forged to table, forged to table, or
Forge a
something like
table,
that.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and we did a collaborating. We did a kitchen folding knife. It's about 13 inches long, got a 6-inch cutting surface, and that was a project that he called, and he's like, "Hey, man, I want to make a folding kitchen knife. Can you do it?" And it was really challenging, but a lot of fun. So we bonded over that too. But yeah, he's a good buddy, man. He's a good guy. Good guy.
Yeah, he obviously has been hanging out with Steve Schwartzer too much because like
Yeah,
my understanding is that, like Steve is like that too, where he's like he'd call you up and it's like, hey, like I'm gonna come in the shop, and they're like, oh okay, well like what you want to do? It's like I'm there tomorrow.
yeah. I
let's
want to make knives.
yeah
Yeah,
let's do it like right now. Like, okay, well
yeah,
I guess we're stopping what we're doing.
yeah. That was an interesting. No kidding though. That's exactly how it went. He's like, and I remember I'm like, oh, you want to get something to eat? No, I want to go make knives. I'm like, oh, geez, here we go. It's gonna be a late night. No, but it was a lot of fun. That's one of those experiences you remember forever, man. It's cool that he wanted one, right? That he cared enough to come get one because you know, discerning tastes being what they are.
Well, yeah, and it's always interested me in the like the celebrity knife maker now. Like, I mean, maybe that was common in the old guard and the guild and the international makers and stuff, and then we have this like little bit of lull, and then some people have taken that forge and fire experience like and been able just to take it to a completely different level, right? Because
Yep.
like Neil's like friends with Jason Momoa, and it's doing like this like celebrity thing. It's like similar to like Jason Knight, right?
Yeah.
They're taking it to a different like celebrity status. And I missed my opportunity. My daughter, heart transplant recipient, and
Oh,
while we were in the hospital, I was planning on going to a Hammer Inn at Texas Farrier Supply where Neil was going to be at, and I just wanted to like get to see what he was doing and everything like that. But I was like, even though I could have left the hospital, I would have felt bad because of it. So it's like
yeah. That's not it. Yeah.
yeah, you take
Not a reason to do that.
yeah, no. I mean, so yeah, I think about that because I made the right decision, but I also missed an opportunity to just to get to hang out in that. I guess it was really exciting. Texas Ferry Supply has people come in once in a while that just kind of pop the scene.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in talking to people like that mostly because I want to discover like what is the progression of thought or serendipity to get from kind of where I'm at just as like a a lowly knife maker, right? To somehow this thing happens where you just just become real popular. You're a household name.
The community's small, man. I mean, realistically, I mean, the 3 degrees of whatever it is, Kevin Bacon kind of thing. I mean, in knives, it's 1 degree pretty much across the board. I mean, it's there's not anybody that, and even I've had people buy knives randomly that show me, and I've never heard of the maker, but we've been to Blade Show 3 times. He's 3 tables over, right? And I never talked to him. So there's a lot of people in the community, obviously, but it's neat that it's that small. Like I was at USN a couple weeks ago in Vegas, and I'm standing in line, and the owner of ProTech is standing behind me, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I think his name is Dave. I forget off the top of my head. It's the
Hmm.
first time I ever met him, but we're just talking about how long this line is, and he's wearing a ProTech shirt, and I go, "Oh, you work at ProTech? I really like their stuff." And he goes, "Well, I kind of started ProTech." It's like, whoa, that's really cool.
Like,
Speaking of knife famous, but
yeah.
it's a small community like that, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, I mean, now we kind of know each other, um, and everybody's to my experience so far, barring like one or two people, everyone's super welcoming, really nice people, always willing to talk. Really, I mean, I don't know if it happens that way with all groups, but not the knife community to me is just like my kind of people. I've been in IT, I've been in lots of different industries where I just feel like the outsider. And finally, in the knife community, it's just a lot of like-minded people that I enjoy getting along with. I've told people in the past, regardless of how this goes, I hope Keanison is around for a long time, but regardless, I found what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Like I enjoy this enough that I will be in knives forever. I couldn't imagine doing anything else at this point. So it's pretty cool. I enjoy it.
I would agree with you. Like I was at Atlanta at Blade Show, and I was sitting right behind um, Steve Johnson, and I didn't realize it, dude. Everybody was coming up and wanting to get pictures with him. I bet you in probably 100 or more pictures, I'm there, and somebody can probably see me craning my neck around and like photobombing them, because I was like, "What's going on here?" But then, we had candy set up on a table that my buddy couldn't come to, and so his wife and him, they were sitting at their table doing their thing, and they were like, we haven't eaten anything. I was like, well, like, do we like can we get you something, or do like there was like, no, these little snacks are fine, and I was like, okay, and then we got to talking more, and I'm like, dude, I've like I grew up with your knives. Like
Yeah.
your logo alone is iconic in the industry, right? I said, but I guess I just never put the two together. Like this face belongs to those knives and everything. And well, it's like you and I. Like we've never met, but I've seen your knives around for forever in the Texas scene, especially, right? And I've even seen you walk around at shows and stuff, but we never been able to connect, physically. But that's one thing I really like about shows, and I like about specifically what Blade Show has been doing, is because there really does not seem to be a separation between knife makers at a show like that. When you're in a big exhibit and everything, you really can meet just about anybody and have really
Yeah.
great genuine conversations. And it's not like one's the lowly knife maker and the other one's celebrity status. It's just like we're all just here trying to do this thing and enjoy the
Yeah.
vibe of the show. So
And keep the industry going, right? So that we all have customers to sell knives to. I I always tell there's so many great knife shows across the country every year, but and Blade Show is overwhelming. Blade Show Atlanta is just, I mean, you said you've been out there. It's an experience, right? I mean, it like nothing you've ever done. But and as awesome as the show is, the best part about Blade Show Atlanta is the pit afterwards,
yeah,
right? I
absolutely.
mean, being able to just hang around, talk to people, see other knives, play with knives, not just collectors, but makers are down there hanging out, and like you said, it's we're all. I mean, there's no such thing. I mean, famous knife maker, whatever, but everybody's just a person down there. Everyone's just trying to make a living, and the knife industry as itself. I mean, it's not like a huge money maker. Nobody's pulling up in a Ferrari out there, right? I mean, it's we're all just trying to stay with it, but yeah, I enjoy that so much about what Blade Show does. The way that you get to interact with makers and collectors and things like that. It's a really a surreal experience. And all the shows are great like that, but Blade Show Atlanta specifically, it really has a the after party is the best way to get in with makers and have conversations. But show floors, like you said, we've probably seen each other at some of the shows, but when you're walking the show floor, it's so hectic, man. It's like overload. There's knives, there's people, there's you know trinkets and things all over the place to keep your interest. So it's hard to see anybody out there, but yeah, it's really fun to be able to hang out and
Yeah. Yeah.
do all that.
Blade Show, well, lots of knife shows are like this, but Blade Show specifically is like for me like walking in a casino. Like I know I have some money to spend and I ended up
Yeah.
walking out in debt in some way. It's like Blade Show
I'm gonna
Texas.
lose it all.
Yeah, dude. Like I'll have all this handle material that I wasn't planning on it, and maybe I'm
Yeah.
stopping by Vegas Forge or something, and
Yep.
maybe my kids convinced me to buy a few ballast songs, and I'm like, what? Like I might have sold a few knives, but now I got back in the red. It's like,
Right.
it,
I know. That's what I say. Like, same thing for us. I mean, all the materials, right? Especially blade, all the materials. You can just go crazy, right? I mean, I could come home broke every time. I try not to buy knives, and I try to be very sparing on materials these days. And obviously, I'm gonna get. I always kick myself. I end up getting home from the show and sitting down and ordering material online, like that was gonna save me any money, right? Like, what was I should have just bought it at the show. I always, but I want to come home with money, right? Like I want that positive, like, okay, I had all the money when I got home, and now I'm gonna spend it because otherwise it just goes, man. Uh, I haven't met Mike Norris in person. He's been at Blade Show multiple times, but I haven't gone to his table because I know if I go, I'm just gonna walk away with a mountain of steel because he's just so talented. Um, and the guys at Vegas Forge are some of my best friends. I mean, I always leave a show with something Vegas Forge that's not cheap. And I mean, Chad Nichols too, good buddy. I was just thinking, I need some Chad Nichols stuff, and I don't think I'm going to see him in Utah. Utah's the next one. You ever been out to the Blade Show West?
I haven't. I had I had a reservation on a table last year, but then my daughter, COVID caused her to go into some heart rejection. Just like it was a
Yeah, I can imagine.
bad immune system response, and so she had to go on these treatments for 6 months to try to keep her from rejecting her heart. And I was like, I have this table on reservation. I think I put a deposit down on it, but I was like, I just can't go. I can't see myself going to a show and trying to do this knife thing, knowing that my heart is back here in Texas and suffering through that
Absolutely.
stuff. And so,
100%.
you make decisions, but it was the inaugural year of Utah and whatnot. I heard it was great, but I didn't.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, I decided after that entire experience, I was like, maybe I'll do a few local shows, but I'm going to take just a year off to kind of like reevaluate what it is I'm doing with my life. And so, like next year, I started back up with a Blade Show Texas. We're still kind of undecided on whether probably not going to go to Atlanta. I might do Texas and Utah for a while, but it's mostly in like in Atlanta. I kind of balance out like the fact that if you're doing Airbnb versus staying in the local hotels or whatever, it is
Hmm.
there are traffic constraints and whatnot, and it's kind of like the hood around everywhere.
A
Although
little bit. Yeah.
yeah, although I didn't mind it too much, but I swear like there's always something going on, and but maybe we'll do it next year. Maybe not. I don't know. My wife is kind of deciding factor on that. But like
Yep.
something.
They always are.
Yeah, something about like the balance of shows and everything is like my wife has been like very very supportive of the fact that I must go off and do these things, right?
Every holiday weekend.
Yeah, well, basically, right?
Yeah.
It like I used to be a very aggressive hunter. I was like pretty much when it came to any type of season that was worth having, I was out there. And when I wasn't doing that, I was fishing in the meantime. And I kind of switched that addictive personality to doing knives. And so
Right.
in that way, I would always try to schedule some type of thing that we could do extra as a family around the knife show. And she's like, "No, dude, like we can't do that because like while you're prepping for the show, it's like you're zeroed in on it and you're doing the show. And then like if we do anything before or after the show, you're just either burned out from the show or you're getting ready.
Yep.
It's always on your mind." And she's like, "We have to have separate family time." And I'm like, "Well, I can do it all. It's fine." But then I realize I need to be able to be present with them when we're doing things. So, um,
Very true, man. It's a tough balance. My wife is very patient with me. You know what, it's this knife thing is not easy, and we've talked about it. Some days I'm really excited to be done with my day. Other days not as much, and it's an up and down. But yeah, it shows. I mean, it's literally every holiday weekend, every long weekend you have in the year is there's probably a knife show, and that happens that way. She's very understanding because otherwise it would be tough. Um, the knives, they're a fickle mistress.
yeah, and yeah, I mean, and our families have to share us with not only the knives, but then also our customers, but then also all of our friends, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's like I don't have knife guys or buddies that come over every weekend and just hang out. Like we don't do Dungeons and Dragons and we don't do grind-ins and stuff like that. But like there's an exceptional amount of time that I spend just cultivating relationships and friendships within knives, and some of my best friends in life are actually in knives now too. And I've found that it's a very endearing to have a support system around what it is that you're personally doing too.
yep.
But yeah, the family sometimes doesn't like to share it, and I'm actually proud that they will tell me sometimes when I'm going a little bit overboard and we need to have some like time off. Like I try to do that myself, but then they'll also say, "Hey, like let's do something that's not knife related for once." And I'm like, "Okay,
Yeah,
can you hold that thought? I got a podcast scheduled."
yeah. Tell me, yeah, sure. Tell me about that later. I got something to do.
Yeah,
Yep, that sounds about right.
I'm like, you could talk to me, but we're gonna have to do it on a podcast.
Here, click on this link. I'll be there at 1.
Oh yeah. Well, funny thing is like our 8 year old man, she is like a fanatic about knives too. And she's not to the stage yet where she really understands maker like different makers too much. But she understands like what she likes, and she looks at Knife Magazine and Blade Magazine and stuff like that. And she's like, well, do you want to go on like Instagram and look at people's stuff? And I was like, she has this little clutch of handle material that in her room too. It's all like little things that we've picked up at knife shows and stuff. But
That's awesome.
she asked a few days ago if she could be on the podcast, and I was like, like how could I do that? Because I don't like, if I'm talking to a guest, it's like, it's a guest thing, right? But I was like, why? Well, I was like,
Yeah.
well, I said your perspective on knives as a youngster is interesting to me. Do you just want to spend a few minutes and I can interview you and ask you questions? She's like, that would be rad. So I was like,
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah. So sometime soon, because I told her that we could do it, and so it's just established fact that I have to do it now. But at some point, I'm gonna have a little excerpt where she can just like sit and talk about what she likes about them, and I can pick her brain, see what an 8 year old
Yep.
thinks about knives.
I like it. I'm interested. I'll be there.
she
Probably better than what I have to say about it.
It'd probably be more popular. You know, like I when Chris Crawford and I first started this thing, we interviewed each other first, and out of all of the shows that I've done, mine is one of the least popular shows. It's like nobody wants to hear me and how I got into knives, but I think it's also probably because they're like, we get enough of that through osmosis with you talking to other people because you won't shut up. But I have
Those are true friends.
well, I have two goals. Like one is to learn as much as I can about my guests and just like get down to the genuine, and the other is to try to put my foot in my mouth somehow. So,
Well, I do that very well no matter where I go. So I
hey,
don't know if that's a goal for me or more just a personality trait.
oh yeah, yeah, it's 100% my personality, and I've just embraced it. So it's a goal too.
There you go. I like it. I
Uh,
like it.
um, I have to say, I've been looking at like these like challenge coins and stuff that you've done, and I think that they're rad because there's something about challenge coins that I'm really interested in. And like worry stones, challenge coins, stuff like that, like the accoutrements of EDC.
Hmm.
But when you were doing the stuff with your tritium course, I thought you
There
had
we go.
a Star Wars one. That was really rad. Like what made you decide to pull together those mediums and then do tritium vials in it?
So that coin itself was well, I've always loved tritium, but that was a kind of a brainchild of David Carver and I. He was out here one weekend making knives, just hanging out in the shop, helping out. I forget, it was sometime last year. And we were having a beer after work and sitting there. We were talking about tritium and the challenge coin thing. And it wasn't exactly that design, but I think I brought up to him, I was like, it'd be really cool if we inlaid tritium in a challenge coin. And then it was like, well, but we can't cut all the way through, or it's going to have to be on both sides, so we just like anything in this industry, we just sat there for a minute and went back and forth like, oh, what, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, so we, just, it was one of those, how do we do it? How can we get it done? And I love that, I have so many creative friends, Mike at Keybar and my buddy Glade, who started Hellbent Holsters. And I mean, just guys that are just David Carver, I mean, that are there to, all right, what can we do? Let's go sit down and hash this out and see what we can do with it. And there's so many people that love doing that stuff. So yeah, that was just David and I sitting around like, hey, what can we do? And then I came back and I did those graphics. I looked up some images that I could trace and figure out what was cool about that. What made it difficult was, and I have it around here somewhere because it didn't come out great, but was trying to figure out how to cut, a channel to recess that tritium in there. Where, you know, we could have CNC'd it or tried to manual mill it, but I really wanted it to be have some sharp corners on it so the tritium fit in there really snugly. And then we had to offset the tritium vials on either side because we couldn't cut all the way through and they were really deep, right? So there was a lot of really cool challenges on that project that came out really neat. But that was I'd love to be able to do more of that. It's unfortunately we keep our quota pretty tight around here of just making knives, which we do very well. But I always want to start new projects like that. I love the guys that spend a lot of time with that stuff. I think next year we're going to go back to challenge coins. We tried to do tactical patches this year, and it just wasn't as much fun. I enjoyed doing the coins. I like the coming up with new graphics and things for those.
Yeah. I actually, I never, I did, I guess I didn't know how much tritium was interesting to other people in industry, right?
Yeah.
But I actually grew up around tritium in an odd way. So my parents met at this company in Pennsylvania that used to make like signage, and they would like exit signs and stuff, and they would be
Okay.
painted with tritium. And
Oh wow.
yeah, and so it's like I think if I remember correctly, my mom would actually paint like the exit sign itself with tritium paint. And so they always, because there's certain standards where you have to have it not powered but visible on
Sure.
the doors and stuff. And so they had used tritium, and this is like, when they met was in the 80s, and
It had to be because that sounds terribly unsafe to
yeah.
paint with tritium.
Well, yeah. So if my sister was born in the early '80s, it was probably in the late '70s, approximately, right? And
All
so,
right.
and so they got married and everything, and then because of their experience in working with tritium, there was a company in Canada that was minority owned. He was Jewish, and he had a watch company in Switzerland, and so he was in Canada, had a watch company in Switzerland, but then also had a presence in the United States, so that way he could get government contracts.
Okay.
And you have to bid for them and all that stuff, and you get a certain allowances for minority owned businesses, and so the guy was doing this stuff, and it so happens, I think, that my dad had met somebody there when we were living in Canada. We lived in Prince Edward Island for a little while, and some
Cool.
startup thing that he was doing with another person. Anyhow, that folded, and we moved back to Pennsylvania. But whatever the case may be, Desert Storm came around, and in each one of the government issued watches was a tritium core on each one of the dials.
Yep.
And so, because of the fact that it's a nuclear isotope of sorts, and semi-toxic,
Yep.
they each one of those tritium cores had to be tested. So the watches, they had the tritium in them, and then it was faced with crystal, and then each one of those watches had to be tested to make sure that the leakage of tritium was minimal, or met state or federal and international standards. And so my parents, in this factory, like this little laboratory, would swab all those watches and put them in these old machines that just ran DOS prompt. And I can't remember if it was a mass spectrom, like a mass spec machine that would measure what was in those little vials. But I can just remember going back and forth from where this lab was at to New Jersey to ship them off, and them testing stuff. Like, we'd spend long nights just sleeping in the office area, because we couldn't go in the lab because it was not kosher,
Sure.
because of testing and whatnot. But yeah, my dad was certified. He could have a lab assistant, which was my mom, and they could
Wow.
go in and test all these stuff. So hundreds of thousands of watches out to Desert Storm in the
Wow. How
90s.
cool.
Yeah, and so I learned a little bit about tritium. But my mom said, when she worked at this plant, if somebody tested too high for tritium, they would just send them home with a case of beer and to say to drink it, and then they would pee it all out, and then as long as they tested low enough, they would be able to go back to work.
Good to know. Now I'm going to tell my wife why I need to drink more beer.
Yeah, right. But it's interesting. It's interesting because I've always thought the tritium is cool, especially different colored tritium, and the ability to put it in things.
Okay.
Like some of these watches, I think my dad had bought one at some point in time. But over 35 years, the tritium starts to diminish, because
Yep.
the glass doesn't hold it for forever. But what you guys did with that is cool. Like the concept of being able to put a vial in there and then not break it and everything, and
Yeah.
and also not have to deal with government regulations, because nobody cares about that. There's no OSHA in knife making, at least at our
Right.
level.
Yeah. In challenge coin making,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
Yeah, I'd probably if we did too many of them, we'd probably get in trouble. But it's really cool. I just love the concept of it. I have quite a few of them here. I'm probably getting my radioactive dose today. But yeah, I've always really enjoyed it. I think it's a really cool little thing. But like everything else we play with, it's probably unsafe.
Yeah, well, so one of the last things I kind of want to talk about is I'm in the eclecticism of your knives. I've noticed some materials that you select that are a little bit oddball, and I think that it's actually from you that I saw. Is it Chaotic Arts? Does like those resin pours?
Hmm.
And I'd been talking to him since I can't remember when your first use of that material was, but do you find yourself like reaching out into the industry and trying to find like unique stuff to put in your knives? Because that's one example of, early on his stuff was pretty cool, but he's like taking it to a completely different level with some of the stuff that he's doing now, and I'm like,
I agree. Those 3D printed things he's doing, they're
dude,
so cool, aren't they?
yeah, I mean,
Speaking of that, I just bought something from him the other day.
yeah, it's well, I bought some stuff from him. I know that like now his stuff like he posted up and it's like immediately sold, and
Yeah,
it's cool to see because where is he at, in Missouri or Upper Arkansas, somewhere like that?
somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah, and taking it from like really small batch to the demand being higher and him still keeping that small batch type of mentality and process, and then taking his artistry to a completely different level. Like all the stuff that he makes, I'm just really interested in, and it's I think it's beneficial in this in our industry to be able to find stuff like that, kind of like diamonds in the rough, and be able to incorporate it into things, and then that be like an established norm.
Yeah.
Do you look from makers like that of materials and things, and try to invest early on in them inside of your own work?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always looking. I mean, so I feel like the short answer is yes. I'm always looking for something new, right? Something that we haven't tried before. But within learning, the things that we've learned about the constraints of what we do, right? Which the chaotic stuff is awesome. It's one of the things that's takes a little bit more patience to work with. You got to learn your process so that you can do it properly, which is great when you nail it down. There's applications for everything, and I love working with his stuff. He's so talented. But yeah, I'm always looking for the new stuff. I think mostly because it gets played out a lot, right? There's so many things that people use repeatedly, I, that that we don't want to keep doing. It sounds bad, but some of it's just overdone, and it's like, well, what else can we do? What can we do that's a little bit different? And I don't know that we need to. I don't actively go seek it out, but just like anybody, I'm a fan of materials and the resins and all that stuff, and I like trying it. So I think these days more so people reach out to us and say, "Hey, I've got something new. Will you try it?" Right? Because they know that we're not going to be that guy that's like, "Oh, sorry, that really shouldn't go there." More like, "Yeah, we'll give it a shot. Like, let's see how it goes. Let's see what it does." So I think we get a lot exposed to that a lot more these days. But like I said, I my background's in industrial design. I've always really enjoyed materials, um, and I like pushing it a little bit further, seeing what you can do with them versus. But everybody does. We talked about finishing micarta being played close to the chest back in the day. I think everyone's looking for the new cool stuff, the new ultim, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That you can use that's going to be very stable and work well for the industry versus some of the other stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, man, I love materials. I always looking for the next thing. If there's somebody listening that has the next cool material, send it. We'll use it.
Yeah, well, I mean, examples of that are like when you did the Hawk's Nest dollar bill signed by Alan Shepard. That was pretty
Yeah,
rad. Yeah,
that one was crazy.
the forged bronze by was it Hot
Oh,
Metals?
yeah, that was a cool one too.
Yeah, I have a
Uh,
I have a pair of his knuckles that I bought at
Yeah,
Lost Pines 2 years ago.
he's he's a good dude, man.
Yeah, but it's it's interesting to me. I think that there's so much room to be able to look at materials and aesthetic and patterns and design and come up with different ways to express yourself. And case in point is really what you guys are doing with your knives. So that's kind of like the lesson learned, I think, and kind of why I wanted to talk to you is just because the way that you pull things together is so unique and so beautiful and artistic that you're going to be the Frank Lloyd Wright of the not mid tech but the Mac industry. Frank Lloyd
Yeah,
Wright and Mac combined
that would
together.
be fun, man. That would be something to aspire to. Not just to have the notoriety, but to have the respect of the rest of the industry like that, would mean a lot. You mentioned the awards not being everything, but it's one of those things that shows you at least you're on the right path, and that other people are paying attention and that the rest of the industry respects what you're doing, which is, I think, the most important thing. Um, everybody's got their opinions and everybody's fickle here or there, but um, to know that the people that are working really hard to do the same thing you're doing have respect for what you're doing is everything to me. I think it's a huge part of why we do what we do. Um, and the contrary is the same too. We talk about the critics. I mean, somebody's always going to say something bad and say, "How dare you do that?" or something like that. But yeah, I mean, just so you're doing something you love, and it's easy to point out the people that are faking it, right? The people that are just doing it for notoriety, and some people do it because they love it. So um, hopefully, people see how much we enjoy what we do in our work and comes across.
Yeah, I think that we strive to be able to exist in a world where validation is not required, and we build up
Sure.
the mantle of our being to do that, but secretly need validation. It's
Yeah.
having a hug from your parents is like the most comforting thing. And I think
Yep.
having it like being embraced by the industry and by your peers and by the people that you admire is also important. And
That was
I,
very well said. I like that.
well, and I don't know. I mean, I seek validation. I sometimes I think that it could be a dirty word. The same with like mental health type of stuff or whatever. But like there is a place and a time to give it, and there's a place and a time to receive it. And I think that you know, um, I'll try to think of a good way of coalescing that idea. But it's basically just that I want people to be more receptive towards being honest and being supportive. And I think it's great that the industry is where it's at, but I know that there's still a lot of struggling artists out there that are just trying to find that secret sauce that makes them feel like what they're doing is valid.
Yeah.
So if we could just be a little bit more like encouraging to people in a way that is significant to us. Like there's things that I look at your work that I really desire, but that might not always be what you're looking for. Like I can appreciate the timing and detents and everything like that being important, but that those technical things are not as intrinsic to me as the way that things visually look.
Yeah.
And so like I can speak only on the visual side because I'm not really experienced heavily in the mechanical side. But you're nailing it on the visual side, and it's always something that I look forward to seeing your posts come up, and then I get to peruse through all of your stuff all over again, and it's just like I get to see a story being told through your knives, and that's really great to me.
Thank you very much. That's awesome. I appreciate that.
Yeah, bud. Well, you got knives to make, and I got knives to make for this show because I have yet to make one.
Yeah, it's coming up quick, man.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, most of it's done. Most of it's done. I just need to put handles on it and grind some blades and stuff. So, but it's an honor to actually be able to spend this time with you and talk through your craft and your art. And man, you're as nice in person as you seem to be on social media, even more so. And I just, anytime you need anything, you let me know, and I'll be there to help you. Okay.
Same, buddy. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're too close. We'll have to talk more.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.